Well, welcome to another episode. I'm glad to have you. These topics always get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more impactful as we break them down. So this episode was recorded in late spring of 2024, probably with a release date in May. And we are specifically going to cover the FTC's new TCPA rules for lead-generated communication. The ruling dropped in December of 2023. It was expected to come, but it was expected to come sometime this year. And in a surprise move, right before the Christmas holiday, the ruling passed with impactful dates and impactful changes for lead generation and marketing and communication in higher education. So a little bit on TCPA, if you're not familiar, that's the Telephone Consumer Protection Act that was enacted in 1991, and it was mainly designed to restrict telemarketing communication, and it was aimed at reducing unsolicited phone calls and text messages prior to consent with these communications, and that's essentially what drove this act. Very relevant to higher education, right? TCPA compliance is critical for schools. Schools often communicate with students, alumni, parents via text, phone, for admissions, fundraising, academic progress, and TCPA essentially impacts all of that communication. I think one of the probably details that most people misunderstand in higher education as it relates to the TCPA is that it only impacts outbound prospecting or admissions practices. That's not true. It's all communications with students. Today, I'm just going to be covering the key changes that were passed in December of 2023. Some go into effect this summer, others go into effect next January. I'll give you the exact dates as we go today. The National Do Not Call Registry was expanded. The National Do Not Call Registry prior to this ruling of December of 2023 only applied to phone communication. So if you had put yourself on the DNC list, schools or any type of business, frankly, was not able to reach out to you via phone, solicited or unsolicited. The ruling from the end of last year, essentially expanded that use case to text messaging. It now applies to marketing text messaging. So the framework overlaps with the TCPA, right? As they were trying to address robocalls and robotexts, but its broader reach now impacts all commercial telephone solicitation to consumers who are listed on the National DNC registry. And that includes telemarketing communication and any type of prospecting by higher education. That specific part of the rule goes into effect July 2024 of 2024, right? It had a couple of different pieces and bits to it. The one-on-one consent part of the ruling is the big, the big hoopla, the big disruptor in multiple sectors. But the FCC was essentially worried that consumers were getting unwarranted calls and text messages when their numbers were being shared or sold. So outside of higher education, think you're shopping for insurance, home, auto, whatever it may be, and you land on a website that's a brokerage site that represents multiple insurance providers, and you give your information to the brokerage site, and then they sell it to multiple insurance companies, let's say 5, and those 5 insurance companies then begin to outbound prospect or market to you, technically without your consent. So you gave your consent to the broker site or the shopping site, and they shared that information with multiple insurance companies. This is a very common practice in higher education. Whether you're a junior, senior in high school, or going to become a freshman in college, non-traditional student looking for career education or adult education, a transfer student from a community college to a university, somebody seeking their graduate studies in a very specialized degree, and you land on a grant marketing website, you land on a scholarship website, you land on a career advising website. They have many names in higher education, right? Affiliate lead providers, affiliate websites, pay-per-lead vendors, pay-per-lead brokers. In the past, because there was no rules governing this practice, still it works like this today. The student essentially said, I'm interested in this type of degree. And I'm interested in hearing about this type of degree from multiple schools. And then that website or that company or that marketing arm or that group, whatever it may be, took that information, gave it to a bunch of different institutions, and those institutions marketed and or reached out to the student. A very common practice, yet unknown practice, is high school senior lists being sold at scale to multiple university systems and our colleges that then market via phone, text, email, and mailer to potential graduating seniors to apply at their institutions. So that's kind of where this is coming from. But the FCC specifically will now require marketers to obtain what's called one-on-one consent before contacting consumers. So they are prohibiting practices such as asking for consumer consent to share their information with partner companies, with marketing partners, including when the lists of those entities are only available in small print or through hyperlinks. So under the new order, shared lead information with a chain of partners is not permitted. Rather, when you're texting and calling, you have to have consent prior to doing it. You have to have express written consent prior to making those calls or text messages from that single consumer or single student at a time. In the language, they call it single seller at a time. There's no expectation either, right? So there's no exception. There's no gray area in the ruling the way that it was written. So if you are one of those scholarship websites, you essentially have to say, look, we think you're a great interest for so-and-so university. Would you like to hear from this very specific university? Yes, I would. It's the only university that website can give the information to on behalf of the student. Now, they put the responsibility on both the marketer and the institution making the call or outbound text message. So it's a big deal. It does require essentially the modification of many business practices, especially the agencies and marketing companies and websites in higher education. And then on the institution side, it means that you have to have proper measure and control internally to make sure that you have proof of consent, right? And we talked about this a lot. There's a lot of new technology that essentially allows you to capture the moment, to screen share or IP capture the moment that person opts in or consents to receiving information from your institution. This very specific part of the ruling goes into effect January 27th of 2025. There's a couple other elements that were added. Clear, disclosure. The new rule essentially expands the disclosure requirement, saying that your disclosure has to be clear and direct. They assert that if compliance with the with the requirement, you have to essentially have electronic proof that the prospective student saw the disclosure and opted in to receiving information from your institution. The FCC is limiting the number of telemarketers that a website can list for prior express written consent. So there's a couple of different elements tied to this. If I was to summarize it, it looks like this. The main one is that the DNC list, or the National Repository, now applies to text messaging. So you'll see a lot of updates and upgrades from your CRM providers, marketing automation software providers, student information system providers to allow you to opt into that. If not, you'll need to do some of the work to make sure your systems do. Or if you have control over your settings, essentially anybody marked as DNC will be impacted both on the outbound call side and the outbound messaging side. Email is completely different. Then you have this new wrinkle where you have to have one-on-one consent before you outbound call or text somebody, student in this example. The added details here is that you have to have digital proof and that you have to have clear disclosure around this process on your opt-in forms. So a lot to unpack, a lot to unwrap. Just wanted to get you the nitty-gritty details so that you can act on them. Again, you got until July 24th of 2024 to come into compliance with, having a mechanism or a policy or a procedure where you also are not outbound texting those on the National Do Not Call Registry. You got until January 27th of 2025 to come into compliance with the one-to-one consent part of this new ruling and the elements that essentially surround it. Thanks for being with us this episode.